Welcome back to the Before AGI podcast. If you've been following our series on AI and power, well, you know why we're here. This is episode 3, and today we're really diving deep into a fundamental question: who actually controls the major AI ecosystems?
Yeah.
And what does that mean for access?
Exactly. That's the mission. We've looked at the research you shared, and it really boils down to this core conflict: centralization versus collective intelligence. This tension is shaping pretty much everything right now: innovation, regulation, the works.
Yeah, and one analysis used this great analogy I wanted to bring up. It asks, are we building AI like a few giant closed-off private power plants? Or is it going to be more like a distributed shared grid that, anyone can tap into? I think that frames it perfectly.
It really does.
So today, we need to unpack who's behind the big players: OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and also look at how the open source world is, well, fighting back.
And understanding that control structure is vital for you, whether you're maybe a developer involved in a startup or just tracking how this shifts global power. The whole economics of AI hinges on who owns the compute and those foundational models. So let's start with those big power plants, the centralized players.
Okay, so the landscape right now, it's really an oligopoly. In the West, it's dominated by a few huge American companies. And then globally, you see similar giants in China, like Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, often with significant state connections.
Yeah.
Our sources consistently point to 3 major ecosystems driving this centralized model: OpenAI, Anthropic, and of course, Google with DeepMind.
And behind those names, there's just staggering amounts of money shaping the infrastructure, right? Let's start with OpenAI. It's got that unique, almost kind of confusing structure. How does control work there, really, beyond Sam Altman? It's deliberately complex. It's set up as a public benefit corporation using a capped profit model. Technically, the ultimate authority is the nonprofit board. Their stated mission, at least on paper, is to ensure the tech helps humanity, even if that means, limiting returns for investors.
But the money makes that complicated, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Microsoft has put in something like, what, $13.8 billion for about a 27% stake in the capped profit part? That's significant.
It is, but maybe even more critical than the cash itself is how that investment locks in the infrastructure. For years, Microsoft Azure was OpenAI's only cloud provider, exclusive. When we talk centralization, it's this kind of vertical integration tying the model to the cloud provider that builds these massive moats. You're buying control over the pipes, essentially.
Right. And we see a similar pattern with Anthropic, even though they started differently. Founded by ex-OpenAI people with a focus on constitutional AI and this long-term benefit trust, they seem committed to a human-centered mission, but they still ended up tied to the big cloud players.
Absolutely. To compete, you need enormous amounts of compute. That reality led them to take, first, a $2 billion investment from Google in 2023, and then, hot on its heels, an even bigger $4 billion investment from Amazon in 2024, tying their Claude models primarily to AWS.
Okay, so let's just pause there. The 3 big Western cloud providers, Azure, Google Cloud, AWS, are each pouring billions into the key companies building the most advanced models. That doesn't really feel like a random spread of investments. It looks more like a deliberate carving up of the market, doesn't it?
That's certainly how it appears. And then, sort of looming over all of this, you have Google itself. With Gemini and DeepMind, they don't really need these kinds of external partnerships for core infrastructure. They're the ultimate example of that vertical integration we mentioned.
Because they own the whole stack, right? They design their own chips, the TPUs, tensor processing units. They've got the global data centers. They have billions of users generating data. And they build the models in-house. They don't need to partner up for the basics.
Exactly. That complete control is their structural edge. Now, they do have public AI principles about safety and fairness managed through internal reviews, but fundamentally, they control every single layer. And connecting this back to the bigger picture, these massive investments and partnerships create these incredibly powerful, almost self-sufficient ecosystems, which is why, regulators are starting to look very closely.
Yeah, our sources definitely highlighted that. This level of concentration is attracting antitrust attention, especially in the UK. The worry is that these exclusive deals and the sheer cost of entry just create impossible barriers for anyone else. How does a startup, even a brilliant one, compete with a $13 billion partnership and exclusive access to infrastructure? It seems, well, impossible.
And that intense concentration of power is exactly why this counter-movement, the shared grid idea, is so critical. We're talking about the open source movement, which is fundamentally trying to democratize AI innovation and push back against that oligopoly.
And the main hub for this shared grid seems to be Hugging Face. I think of them as like the central library, or maybe the GitHub for AI models.
That's a great way to put it. Hugging Face, which has roots in both the US and France. It hosts, I think it's over 1 million open source models now, plus data sets, tools, the model weights. It's where that global collective intelligence convenes. And importantly, late last year, they launched this thing called the Hugging S service. And here's the interesting part. They partnered with Amazon and Google to do it.
Hold on, wait a sec. If Amazon and Google are providing the cloud backend for Hugging Face's service, isn't that just shifting the centralization point? Are they really resisting, or is this just the big players finding another way to control the ecosystem, kind of like co-opting the resistance?
That's a really sharp question, and it gets to the heart of where control truly lies. Hugging Face's argument and the pitch for Hug Yes centers on privacy and customization. Their CEO basically says companies want to keep control over their own data informational sovereignty and build their own AI capabilities, not just send everything to a proprietary black box. So Huggies helps them run these open models, but cheaply and privately, using their own existing cloud accounts with AWS or Google. The idea is it gives smaller players a real path to build and control their own stuff.
Okay, so the control stays with the user regarding the application and the data, even if the underlying infrastructure is rented. That makes sense. What's really fascinating in this whole open source push is the role Meta, Facebook's parent company, has played. Why would Meta, a company built on proprietary systems and data, suddenly champion openness with Llama?
Well, strategically, it was pretty brilliant. When they released their Llama models starting around 2023 under relatively open terms, they essentially gave the world a powerful blueprint. Suddenly, developers everywhere could download these state-of-the-art model weights and start fine-tuning them, creating thousands of variations, all without needing Meta's explicit permission.
Right, and the genius there is that Meta basically got the entire global open source community to do R&D, testing, and even security hardening for them for free. And at the same time, they embedded their model architecture as a kind of de facto standard. They achieved influence over the shared grid, maybe, instead of direct proprietary control.
Exactly. It really disrupted the landscape. And we also have to mention Stability AI. Their release of the Stable Diffusion text-to-image model back in 2022 was another watershed moment.
Oh, absolutely. That changed everything for AI art generation. Before that, you really needed access to big corporate systems. Then suddenly, anyone with a decent graphics card could download Stable Diffusion and create amazing images on their own machine. It was a huge blow against the big lab-only approach and really embodied Stability AI's mission of, what was it, unlocking open source generative AI.
So let's bring this back to the practical level. What does all this open source activity, this resistance, mean for you if you're a developer or a tech professional trying to actually deploy AI?
Well, the big things are lower barriers to entry and more control, right? Informational sovereignty. Open models are much easier to adapt and localize. Like you're seeing reports of grassroots projects, say in Africa, building models for local dialects that big commercial companies just wouldn't bother with because the market isn't big enough for them.
And access is getting even easier because of new techniques. Things like PEFT, parameter-efficient fine-tuning. This drastically cuts down the compute power and time you need to customize a model. You don't need a giant data center anymore. This lets smaller teams, even governments worried about digital sovereignty, take back some control over how AI is used in their context. Okay, so this brings us to the big strategic crossroads. This tension between the closed power plants and the open shared grid, that's really where the future path of AI is being forged right now. And honestly, it's looking like a mixed picture. Both trends, consolidation, and collaborative openness are really strong.
The argument for the big power plants winning out feels incredibly strong, though. I mean, big tech just has so many advantages. They have the billions in capital, the massive user bases generating data, often exclusive access to the latest chips from NVIDIA. They control the raw materials, essentially.
And if that path dominates, the risks are real. The UK's Competition and Markets Authority, the CMA, explicitly warned about this. They said concentrating control over these foundational models could seriously stifle competition, maybe even slow down innovation and lead to higher prices for everyone.
But there's a counterforce, isn't there? The push for decentralization is getting support from policymakers, too. The EU's AI Act, which came together in late 2023, seems like a huge potential factor here.
It really is. A key aspect of the act is that it looks like open source models might get lighter regulatory treatment compared to the big proprietary ones. And, that wasn't an accident. It was something countries like France and Germany actively pushed for during the negotiations.
That sounds less like just a technicality and more like a deliberate economic strategy, doesn't it? Trying to level the playing field a bit? Maybe give homegrown European startups, like France's Mistral AI, which got a lot of attention, a better shot against the huge American and Chinese players who will face stricter rules for their closed models.
That seems to be exactly the logic. The hope is that this open collective approach could kind of mirror what happened with Linux in the operating system world, harness global research talent to build a powerful, flexible alternative to the dominant closed systems like Windows. It's both an ideological and an economic play for market share.
So when you put all the pieces together, the analysis we looked at, what's the consensus view? Where is this heading?
Yeah.
Full oligopoly, complete decentralization.
The general agreement seems to be that the most likely outcome isn't one extreme or the other, but rather a hybrid ecosystem. Think of it like this. We'll probably have a few dominant, massive, cloud-based AI services, the power plants run by the giants. But alongside them, we'll see a really vibrant, dynamic open source sector, the community generators. Much like, as you said, Linux coexists with Windows today. You'll have the reliable, scalable, centralized options for big enterprise needs, but also this thriving, adaptable core for innovation, customization, and keeping alternatives alive. Hashtag outro. And that really brings us to the core takeaway for you, the listener. The outcome of this ongoing race, this push and pull between closed control by a few and open growth driven by the community, it's going to define who captures the economic and strategic benefits of AI over the next decade. This isn't just about software licenses. It's fundamentally about who controls what might be the most important resource of the 21st century economy.
That's a crucial point and definitely something we'll keep tracking here. So please do subscribe and follow the whole series on the Before AGI podcast for more analysis as this unfolds. And for those of you who want to get more hands-on to actually start using some of these shared grid models we've talked about, not just understand the dynamics, check out the YouTube channel for tutorials and practical insights. It's called Ochieng AI. That's spelled Ochieng and pronounced Ochieng. Ochieng AI on YouTube.
Right. And maybe one final thought for you to chew on as we wrap up. Seeing that even the cloud giants Amazon and Google are now actively supporting open source services like Hugging Face's Hudges, how should developers view openness now? Is it primarily a strategic weapon to use against competitors? Is it becoming just a necessary commodity for a healthy market? Or maybe is it both?
Something to think about.
Mm-hmm.
We'll leave it there for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.